Hello and welcome back to the channel. So in May, two major things happened to me. One, I found booktube. And two, I was informed that after living out of a guest bedroom for 3 years, I'm finally getting my own place in August and I cannot wait. When I moved 1,100 miles from the middle of the US to the West Coast, I had to donate over half of my book collection. Since then, most of my remaining books have been stuck in storage since I moved here 3 years ago. I've slowly collected a handful of books over the years. Thankfully, I've been able to take advantage of my local library. So with the discovery of booktube and the hope of this brand new space, of course I wanted to celebrate. And how do you celebrate? By buying lots of books to fill my shelves. The shelves that I will not have for another 2 months. A silver lining in all of this is that for now, I'm going to be overly successful in finding books that I love or that I really want to read because I'm essentially starting from nothing. So yes, this is absolutely a mega haul video, but this is also an opportunity for me to share some of my stories and for you to get to know me and my reading taste a little bit better. So allow me to take you through a light and dark backwards rainbow of all the books I acquired in May. First up are our white covered books. And the whitest book I came home with is Witch Hat Atelier Volume 1 by Kamome Shirahama. What, you might ask, is my experience with manga? Absolutely none. This book was actually recommended to me by a coworker on my first day ever working at a library. This person that I knew absolutely nothing about and had just met turned to me and said, "Recommend a book to me." And so, having just recently finished The Boy on the Bridge by M.R. Carey, so I recommended to him the first book in that series, The Girl with All the Gifts, which I ended up giving a 4.5. I really, really enjoyed that book, and I would really, really love to go back and reread it. So then I asked him to give me a recommendation too. And he recommended this series to me. If you haven't seen this book before, it has the absolutely most gorgeous line work I've ever seen. It's just so pretty, and it is worth picking up just for that. With only having that black and white line work to focus on, it really just lets me focus on the story more. I read about half of this book at one point, but I had to put it down because I just knew I wasn't at the time going to be able to give it as much attention as I really wanted to. Witch Hat Atelier follows a young girl named Coco who wants more than nothing to be a witch. She's all but given up on her dreams to learn magic when a mysterious stranger visits her village. Coco soon discovers that the magic she longs for is not as far out of her reach that she previously thought. Next, I picked up Elizabethan Cross Stitch by Barbara Hammett. I purchased this at the beginning of the month when I was like fully in a cross stitch frenzy, which has since been replaced by book frenzy. After discovering that the rarest cross stitch pattern that I own, one of the two places it was printed was in an old Better Homes and Gardens cross stitch book, I decided that I needed to borrow every single cross stitch book that my library system owns. What I wanted to know was if there were any other patterns out there that I had missed simply because they were in print and not online, which is usually where I buy my cross stitch patterns. And it turns out I wasn't missing out on much, but I did sometimes find like one cool pattern per book. But this one was one of the few books that had multiple patterns that I was interested in one day maybe taking on. Inside, there's lots of interesting samplers. There's a lot of floral and fruit motifs, some animals in here. One of the best patterns in the book is actually for a fire screen, which seems dangerous to me, to say the least. Buying this book was also my very first experience buying a used book on Amazon. When my package arrived, it was wrapped in just one of those thin plastic mailers, and it was placed directly underneath a leaking rain gutter. So just for hours, it was being pounded on with water. So I picked it up, worried already, and flip it over. There's a hole on the bottom side of the package that was against the cement. So it had been not only being rained on from above, it was also sitting in a puddle of water. Panicked, I opened it quickly and the book was absolutely soaked. Wait, the cover was absolutely soaked. Just completely soaked. But the pages, dry as a bone. It was the weirdest experience. I don't know how it happened. But there's not even any water damage on it. Like, this is just, it's wild. I don't understand. So the gods were shining down on my Elizabethan cross-stitch book, making sure that this made it to me safely. The next book I want to tell you about is The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. I will say that this book is 100% the first book that I was influenced by BookTube to purchase. This book stuck out in my mind after hearing a rave review from one of the first BookTube videos I watched. I don't usually choose YA or romance, so if I had known that this book existed in those genres, would I have purchased it? Maybe not. It cost me 50 cents in a library book sale, so I figured it was a pretty safe gamble either way. Next up, we move into the gray area of the spectrum, starting with The Alice Network by Kate Quinn. This one's more of a transitional white to gray cover, but I still put it in the gray category. The Alice Network has been on my to-read list for 7 years. I don't usually go for historical fiction, but I do seem to have a weak spot for women taking on atypical roles. In this case, the role of spies during World War I. This book is very highly rated, and I only got it for $1. Next up, we have numbers 3 through 7 of the Murderbot Diaries. Those being Rogue Protocol, Exit Strategy, Network Effect, Fugitive Telemetry, and System Collapse. These ones came home with me in May because there was a local bookstore that was closing and I happened to have a $100 gift certificate that I needed to spend before they shut their doors. So I ended up taking home almost the entirety of the Murderbot series. Back in the beginning of the year, I read All Systems Red, which is right here, and I fell hard for the series. I ended up giving it 5 stars. It was my first 5-star of the year. Absolutely loved it. My Artificial Condition is not a part of this haul. I already very reasonably had only purchased the next book in the series. I needed something to spend that gift certificate on, so these all came home with me all at once. The Murderbot series follows a self-aware droid who hacked its own governor module and would really rather you leave it alone so it can watch its soap operas in peace. I'm already sold on the series, so I haven't read any more synopses because I'm already all in and I'll be fitting these in as I go whenever I can. Next, we have King Nix by Kirsten Bacchus. Okay, so I discovered BookTube, and from BookTube, I discovered Book of the Month. And then from there, I went looking for more interesting, less trendy book subscription services. And so I ended up finding a Reddit post that pointed me towards the Fantastic Strangelings Book Club, which is a book club that is based out of the Nowhere Bookshop in San Antonio, Texas. It's advertised as a book club by strange, awkward introverts for strange, awkward introverts. So it seemed perfect for me. In the past, I read so few books per year that I had a really hard time giving up the choice in what I read to anybody else. But with the new possibility of reading more books than I've ever read in my life, I feel ready to take that plunge. After reading the synopses of a few of their picks and finding that I think all of them sounded pretty interesting, I decided to just go for it. and I purchased all of the books that they have chosen for 2024 so far. So I actually have no idea what this book is about besides there's a bird on it. I really like the cover. You'll hear that a lot throughout this video, that when it comes to books, aesthetics matter to me a lot. Moving on to the Black collection. First up, we have Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. This could maybe be one of those transitional gray to black covers. I borrowed this book from the library earlier in the year, and I really, even with the library flimsy on the outside, I loved how the book felt. I love the design of like each chapter has like a little chapter design. Oh man, an act design. I love the aesthetic of the book so much. The cover itself is beautiful. When I checked it out early in the year, I loved how this book looked, but I was having to look up so many words, even in the first couple of chapters. So essentially, I did not have the time to give this book that it demands. So I had to give it back. I did, however, decide that I wanted it on my shelves. I know that I'm going to read it. I do think I'm going to love it, but even so, I want to look at it. I will definitely be going back for the sword play, the sacrilegious sense of humor, and of course, the lesbian necromancers. Next, we have Foundry Side by Robert Jackson Bennett. This one has been on my to-read list for 2 years now, and I have no idea how I came across it. I don't have any friends on Goodreads that have read it, and the last person that interacted with this book that added it to their to-read list added it 2 years before I did. So no idea how this one came onto my radar. I do know that this is a very highly rated book, and I've always been intrigued by this cover. I like that it's mostly black. I like that you're getting this cutout window and there's this figure in the front. And in the back, a burning city. It just has like such a cool aesthetic. I even like this random hand. What does that mean? I would assume something mystical or thievery. I don't know. Also, I love how this cover feels. It is one of those matte covers. This just has a nice texture to it which makes it matte instead of having that sticky soft touch. It doesn't like with the soft touch covers, I feel like when I put it in my bookshelf, it brings all the books with it. In February of this year, Robert Jackson Bennett released a new novel called The Tainted Cup. So that name has been on my mind for the entire year, and I think that just contributed to me being like, oh yeah, I've heard that. I definitely need to get this now. Next up is Piranesi by Susanna Clark. During my first week on BookTube, I came across a channel that I don't remember the name of that came off as very literary and very knowledgeable, and they loved this book. It's been on my to-read list for a while, and I found it in a library book sale for only $3, so I snatched it right up. Then I came across another thumbnail on YouTube that was showing off the amazing outside foiling on this book. And I found that out before I purchased it, and isn't that like so cool? I think it looks so neat. It was the cherry on top. Prior to Piranesi, Susanna Clark was best known for Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which is a magical historical fiction that has been on my to-read list for 8 years. So assuming I get to this book first, this will be my first time reading this author. Next, we have the second and last cross-stitch book of this video, and also in my life, Creepy Cross Stitch by Lindsay Swearingen. I mean, does another cross-stitch book better fit my aesthetic? This book doesn't have really big projects in it, but it is full of some awesome smaller projects that you might want to take on. If you yourselves cross-stitch, the pictures of the finished pieces are really well done, and the pattern and information seems to be laid out really well. So I would definitely recommend it for anybody that is familiar with cross-stitch and finds this aesthetic appealing. I should note, though, that most of the projects in here are made on Black Ada. So if that is something that you don't want to deal with, then maybe this one isn't for you. but there are some that are on lighter Ada. I'm hoping to try stitching something from this myself sometime in autumn. I think would be a good time for it. So yeah, I'm really happy to have this one in my collection now of 2 cross-stitch books. All right, next we have White Horse by Erica T. Worth. I love this cover. This is another fantastic Strangelings book pick from about a year and a half ago, and I didn't know that before I purchased it. I found that out later when I was going through their past picks. I first saw this somewhere on booktube. The blurb was interesting, a gritty, vibrant debut novel about an Indigenous woman who must face her past when she discovers a bracelet haunted by her mother's spirit. But I know I wouldn't have immediately purchased this if it wasn't for this particular cover. Out of all of the books that I purchased this month, this is the one that comes closest to buying it for the cover art. I found this book for $7, brand new at a new and used bookstore. And my theory is that they sell books that have very slight cosmetic defects. Like I can handle one little drop of ink when the cover is in perfect condition. Next, we have the book that started me down the path of special editions, and that is The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. And no, this is not a special edition, but it is pretty enough to be. The edges are completely black, absolutely intriguing, and then the inside end papers, it has like this cool pomegranate design. It's gorgeous. I loved it. This is a book that I borrowed from the library originally, and when I saw how pretty it was, I decided I needed it. I don't have much experience with Leigh Bardugo, but I have watched the Shadow and Bone series on Netflix and I really enjoyed it. So I decided to read the first book in that series, and it was all right. But I am convinced that I am going to love the Six of Crows series. So there's hope for this book yet. The Familiar is set in Madrid during the Spanish Golden Age, and it follows Luisa Cotado, a scullion who uses scraps of magic to get through her days of endless toil. When her mistress discovers Luisa's little miracles, her life starts down a new path of notoriety and nobility and all the dangers that come with it. I tend to get lost, and not in a good way, with books that lean heavily on the historical periods that they're set in, but I have high hopes for the fantastical elements of this book to keep me engaged throughout. Next up, we have a slightly transitional black to purple cover, which is Provenance by Ann Leckie. The Imperial Ratch trilogy. I have read 2 of the 3 books in that series, and those books generally take me forever to get through. I do, however, really enjoy the series, and I would love to reread it one day and eventually complete the series. To do that, though, I think what I'm gonna have to do is read the text while listening to the audiobook, because I get so caught up on how I think things are pronounced in my head that I'm spending time processing that instead of being able to focus on the story. So having that narrator in my ear just saying the names how they're supposed to be said, I think will help me so much. As far as I know, Provenance takes place in the same universe but doesn't have anything to do with the original trilogy. So it'd be perfectly fine for me to just read this book right now. Perfectly fine to just skip ahead. It would be fine. I found this one at a thrift store for $3. It jumped out at me when I saw it. There isn't even a lot of Ann Leckie on the shelves at my local library, so finding it in a thrift store was shocking to me. And now we have finally made it to the reverse rainbow I was telling you about. Kicking off our purple books is the book of ile-rien by Martha Wells. I first came across this book on NetGalley, and it collects the novels The Element of Fire and The Death of the Necromancer for the first time, making this quite a chunky boy. It also, I mean, you can see how floppy it is. This is like extreme floppiness. At this point, after how much I enjoyed the first installment of the Murderbot Diaries, I'm pretty much blindly buying anything by Martha Wells. And when I saw that the text had been revised and updated, I knew that I had to get this. I was surprised that there wasn't a hardback release. And now I have my very first jumbo paperback. But this is kind of like good training wheels to see if I am okay with this format, because another book that I'm interested in buying is The Shadow of What Was Lost by James Islington. And if you haven't seen that book, maybe it's like 1.5 times as thick as this one. And I've mostly seen those in paperback. All I know about this one is that ile-rien is the name of the kingdom where this book is set. And there's dark magic and high fantasy, which good enough for me. Finishing off our purple books are The Witches and Matilda by Roald Dahl. I don't think I read one thing by Dahl my entire childhood, but for some reason, the nostalgia is still there for me. I found these books on sale for $1 each at a local bookstore. Neither of them have UPC codes on the back. This one says not for sale. So I don't know. If I look up the ISBN though, it seems to be legitimate copies of the book. I don't really understand what's going on for $1. When I was younger, I did see the film version of Matilda, so I am looking forward to revisiting that story. And I absolutely love Sir Quentin Blake's cover art for The Witches. Kicking off our blue books, we have My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. This one kind of has one of those transitional purple to blue covers. This one has been on my to read list since 2021, and there was an attempt made to read this a while ago. I was trying though to read it on my ancient Nook. The ebook version has a couple of like mixed media like photographs in the front, like first few pages. So I decided my very old Nook was not going to be the best way to experience the book. But now that I'm looking at this, I don't even see like the mixed media bit that I saw in the ebook. It's silly. My library does have this in the hardcover version, and it does have that like 80s, 90s nostalgia, but it doesn't have that like grungy VHS vibe. So I knew I wanted to have this version of that cover on my shelves. I've never read anything by Grady Hendrix before, but I have found that this is an author whose work I am just naturally attracted to. With that said, I have never wanted to read The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. It's just never appealed to me. But it does seem to be a lot of people's favorite Hendrix. If all goes well with My Best Friend's Exorcism, I will more than likely give that one a try. Next, we have The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, which is a book that I have read before, actually. I read this one back in 2018 when I was still in college, so it took me forever to get through, which ultimately I wonder if that contributed to me not loving this book. I liked it, but I ended up giving it 4 stars, and I remember that was me rounding up. Not being head over heels for The Graveyard Book was shocking to me because if I had to choose, I would probably say that Neil Gaiman is my favorite author. So I want to reread this and see how I feel about it now. Even better, I picked this one up used at a library book sale. Next up, we have From Below by Darcy Coates. I'm not sure how I came across this one, but it has been on my to-read list since the end of 2022, which is the year that it was published. I know during my booktube deep dive that I came across this one multiple times, and so it was fresh on my mind. So when I found it at one of those library book sales, it was only 50 cents. So I decided to pick it up. Years before this story takes place, a ship mysteriously vanishes after launching a garbled distress call. And a dive team is tasked with diving down and exploring the wreckage and documenting anything that might have contributed to its tragic end. And then one of the last lines of the synopsis: "But the Arcadia has not yet had its fill of death, and something dark and hungry watches from below," which just leaves me with a ton of questions. Is there something down there that literally has eyes? Is this just figurative and there's some dark forces at work here? What is happening? If a single item from the synopsis elicits this much intrigue, imagine where this story could take us. Next, we have The Fellowship of Puzzle Makers by Samuel Burr. This is another recent Fantastic Strangelings book pick, and it was one of the two synopses that really intrigued me to start down this Fantastic Strangelings path. I was sold by the first line of the synopsis. Clayton Stumper is in his 20s, but he dresses like your grandpa and fusses like your aunt. And then the last line of the synopsis, The Fellowship of Puzzle Makers is pure joy. It is a story about love and family and what it means to find your people, no matter what age you are. So I think this is more of an adoptive family story, but it definitely gives me found family vibes, which is one of my favorite tropes. Also, puzzle games are one of my favorite genres in video games, so I think I'm going to love this book just that much more. And now on to our green books. I keep calling some of these books transitional, but really I couldn't decide if this one was blue or if it was green, but it got dropped into the green category. That book is Little Eve by Catriona Ward. This book was highly recommended to me by one of my librarian friends. To be honest, the synopsis doesn't super intrigue me, but that friend knows my taste in books extremely well and that I trend towards the dark and strange. Above all else, what I really like about this book is the cover. What makes it intriguing is that, like, I knew it was this building on a lake with a reflection on the lake, but it's the reflection that is still and the building itself that has that rippled effect to it, which has implications of the state of the world, or at least the state of the Scottish Isle where this book takes place. I picked this up new at that discounted bookstore for $7, and I actually think I might prefer the aesthetic of the paperback for this one. It's like an extra large paperback, like at least dimension wise. But I've seen the hardcover in the library and I like this one better, I think. Then I picked up Oryx and Crake by Margaret Atwood. This one I found for $2 at the thrift store. I've never read anything by Margaret Atwood, even though I would very much love to read The Handmaid's Tale after watching most of the series. I just know that that book is going to be extremely heavy, so I've avoided it while also really wanting to read it. I want to read this book because it's set in a dystopian near future. Every single one of my friends that have read this book has rated it 5 stars. And thirdly, the second most similar book according to Goodreads is The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which I really, really liked. The one thing I don't really love about this book is that it is an extremely high gloss cover, but hey, that was the norm back in those early aughts, you know? Next up, we have another Roald Dahl classic, The BFG. This is the third and last book I found at that book sale for $1. I have no idea what this book is about, but it has been on my to-read list for 2.5 years, and it does come highly recommended. I actually did not know that this was adapted into a film, so I might have to check that one out after I read this book. All right, now we have The Real Americans by Rachel Kong. This was the Fantastic Strangelings May pick, which means it was released this last month. The book blurb for this one reads, "How far would you go to shape your own destiny? An exhilarating novel of American identity that spans 3 generations in one family and asks, what makes us who we are and how inevitable are our futures?" This book opens from the perspective of a 22-year-old named Lily Chen just before Y2K in New York. Later, it follows a 15-year-old Nick Chen in the year 2021, and then there's no mention of that elusive third generation's perspective, so I'm intrigued how they're going to tie that into this book. I did get to read a couple of chapters of this one before I discovered booktube, and it took all of my time. And one of the things that stood out to me about this book is that the characters were instantly likable. Like in the course of 2 chapters, I was invested in their well-being. I am going to be starting this one over and reading it later this month. Also, as you can see here, this was a book of the month pick. This was my first month ever checking it out. And I did already have a copy of the hardcover book that was released to the general public. So it was interesting to be able to compare the book of the month version to that one. And while this one is okay quality, there's definitely some foil effect, like very slight foil effects on the other book that this one's lacking. I wanted to try out book of the month and just see if I ended up liking it. I, from one book, don't think that I'm going to. but I also wasn't sure if I was going to like this book or not, being that this was the first book in my mind that I was letting somebody else pick for me for that Fantastic Strangelings book club. I decided to just drop the $5 for the introductory offer for this one. Then I can cancel it later if that's the route I decide to take. Rounding out our green books is Cosmonites Volume 2 by Hannah Templer. Volume 1 of the Cosmonites graphic novel series absolutely took me by surprise. I loved it. There were paper girls plus feminist space opera vibes, all set in a neo-medieval universe. It was so cool. There's lots of diversity with skin color and body types in this series, as well as lots of LGBTQIA2 plus representation, which I very much appreciate in what I read. I know that I want to add the first volume of this series to my collection, but I got the second one because not only is it the next book that I need to read in the series, it was also the only book that the bookshop that I mentioned earlier that was closing down. It was the only one they had, so I picked this one up instead of just jumping for the first one. But yeah, I highly recommend this series. Pick up the first one, just 5 stars. You're gonna love it. Now, moving on to our yellow books. Starting with the Very Yellow book that I chose specifically for the Very Yellow prompt for the readathon that I'm taking part in currently. And that is Coyote Dog Girl by Lisa Hanawalt. This one was recommended to me by Storygraph, which has thus far done a pretty good job recommending me books. This one is a graphic novel western that was created by the production designer for BoJack Horseman. It's described as an homage to a lampoon of westerns like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Lisa Hanawalt's Coyote Dog Girl is a self-aware, playful subversion of tropes, which sounds amazing. Despite the challenge having started today, and this being the first book I'm going to read for the challenge, I haven't started it yet. But it has a lot of pretty pictures and not a very high word count. And it seems to be full of that dry BoJack Horseman humor you come to expect. This book is not in my local library's collection, and it's not one that I would have necessarily chosen if not for that readathon. Probably because of the glaring yellow cover. It's just something not appealing about that. But this fits the readathon prompts perfectly, needing to be yellow, needing to be a graphic novel. So I should be starting this one right after I finish recording this video. Next, we have The Enigma Game by Elizabeth Ween. This is what I'm going to call the first book in the Codename Verity series. Codename Verity has been on my to-read list for 8 years. The Enigma Game is a historical fiction set in Nazi-occupied France in the year 1943. Historical fiction, which never sounds the most appealing to me. But every time I reread the synopsis and the promise of a story about female spies and strong friendships brings me right back to it. The Enigma Game was published in 2020 and according to Goodreads is the second book in the series. But if you go to the author's website, there's a recommended order to read them in, so this would be the first on the list. Either way, I didn't even know this was the first book in the series when I saw it at a thrift store and picked it up for $3. All I knew was it was in excellent condition and it was part of a series that I was interested in, which was good enough for me. Next, we have perhaps the most beautiful book in my book haul. And that would be The City of Last Chances by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which is the first of the Tyrant Philosophers series. For some reason, this book was hard for me to put in the yellow category because when I think about this book's cover, when I envision it, I only picture the red in it for some reason, which statistically speaking, there's more gold on this cover than red. I'll admit it. Adrian Tchaikovsky is the author of the award-winning Children of Time series, which quite recently was turned into a television series. The trailer looks really good, by the way. This is another series I discovered on NetGalley because I recognized the author's name. However, I did not realize that the book I was applying for was the second book of the series, House of Open Wounds. So naturally, to be able to review the second book of the series, I wanted to first read the first book in the series. So I borrowed this one from the library, and this is another one that I just love the look and feel of it. But as per usual, I didn't get to it before the time came for me to return it. So I decided, hey, I'm just gonna buy that book. I really like it. Only this was a very difficult book to track down, and I don't understand why. People are literally selling regular copies of this book for over $100. I just don't understand it. This is the book that got me back to Barnes & Noble after a decade of never being there. Like, I hadn't been there in so long that they still sold CDs the last time I was in there. This book looks gorgeous. It has this amazing foil work that I'm just absolutely in love with. It feels really nice. It has that kind of soft touch feeling to it. The synopsis really draws me to this book because it makes the city itself feel like the main character, which I feel it's such a cool concept. Next, we have The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Catherine Arden. This was another fantastic Strangeling book club pick from March of this year. But before I knew that, I added it to my TBR from after watching a few booktube channels mention this book. I wasn't planning on purchasing it at that point, but once I started exploring more book picks, I had to pick this one up. I've only skimmed the synopsis, so I'm not going to trick you into thinking that I know what this book is about, but the title alone is very intriguing, and its genres are tagged as historical fiction and paranormal, which is a combination I don't have a lot of experience with. If you have any recommendations for books that fit that combination, let me know. I am intrigued. Next up, we have Survivor by Chuck Palahniuk. After huge success buying that Elizabethan cross-stitch book, I decided to go through the same seller and take another gamble on a used book. I purchased this in very good condition for $5.50, and then also there was the $4 to ship it to me, so it ended up being at about $9.50 that I spent on this one. I say this book is closer to good condition, so it's not exactly a steal, but thanks to BookTube, I suddenly wanted to read it really badly, and my library did not have it in its collection already. So here we are. It's been a really long time since I've read Palahniuk, but I loved Fight Club, both the movie and the book. One of my best friends in high school loved Chuck Palahniuk, so I am so certain that I've read something else by him, but there is an equally strong chance that I just think that I read something else by him because my friend did such an amazing job telling me so passionately and thoroughly about each book she was reading. I'm really not sure. From the synopsis, Tender Branson, last surviving member of the Creedish death cult, is dictating his life story into the recorder of Flight 2039, cruising on autopilot at 39,000 feet, somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. Stop there. That's where I stopped. That's where I stopped reading it. So at this point, I turn back to the cover and I see this tiny little speck here falling out of the airplane. So I think to myself, wow, cover artist, way to give away the plot, only to realize that that is not a tiny person. That is a tiny kangaroo. Huh? So I keep reading. He is all alone in the airplane, which will crash shortly into the vast Australian outback. What? That's no ocean? All right, now moving on to the one and only orange book. That last one was transitional orange-yellow, but mostly yellow. But now we have a mostly orange book, which is The Fireman by Joe Hill. This one crossed my radar when I was doing these monthly challenges on my Twitch channel, which meant that I made like a tagline theme, and I would play games and I would read books and I would watch movies that all had to do with that theme. It was a lot of fun, but I mostly ended up only reading books and not really being able to dedicate time to streaming the video games that I wanted to play. So anyway, this one came up when I had the theme, I think it was March, and the theme was A Chance of Mushroom Rain. So I was looking for books that had anything to do with mushrooms, spores, mycelium, that kind of thing. This book is about a worldwide pandemic of spontaneous combustion, which is so intriguing to me. And in this world, there exists an enigmatic man known only as the fireman, who has learned to control the fire within himself. This is a chunky book, coming in with a page count of 747 pages. This one will be a true test to seeing if breaking in paperbacks actually does anything. I borrowed the hardcover version of this one from the library whenever that monthly theme was taking place, but that also happened to be the month that I canned that monthly theme project in lieu of a random game pick thing. So I ended up just returning this one to the library. I found a copy of this book at the bookstore for $6, which, I mean, if we're doing dollar to page count comparisons, that's a pretty good deal. Next, we move on to the pink category. Yes, pink has its own category. And this one, I would say, is one of those transitional orange to pink books, but it did land in the pink group. And that is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. I bought this one for $3 at a library book sale. I know, shocking. This book is so garishly salmon pink that it took me an entire week of walking past it and it calling its siren song to me for me to actually stop and pick it up. How this particular version of this book looks on the shelf is the equivalent of the pink razor. Something I try to avoid to the extreme, but the synopsis is actually pretty intriguing and clever. And the only other pink book that I picked up this month is Lore Olympus Volume 1 by Rachel Smythe. This one, you're not going to expect it because I didn't expect it. But I found this one in the library book sale. I could not believe it when I saw it. I grabbed it immediately. I know that the main genre in this is romance, which is not usually appealing to me, but the artwork is absolutely gorgeous. I believe this started as a webtoon series, but the physical print version is very much worth checking out. If you don't know what webtoons are, they're a type of digital comic that is usually intended to be read on your phone. You can read it on desktop though, but it translates extremely well to print. Now on to our red books. Red, my favorite color. First up is Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. I found this one for $2 at the thrift store, and it has been on my to-read list for 2.5 years. So roughly I added it to my TBR just before I started reading Never Let Me Go. And I have an unpopular opinion on that one. I gave it 2 stars. I do find the premise of Clara and the Sun more intriguing. I think I tend to really enjoy stories about androids, which is why it has stayed on my TBR list despite having a negative experience with one of Ishiguro's earlier works. All right, this next one is perhaps my most anticipated out of all the books I bought this month, and that is What Feasts at Night by T. Kingfisher. I first discovered the Sworn Soldier series when browsing books on NetGalley. T. Kingfisher was an author that I knew of, but had also never read before. But they came so highly recommended to me that when I saw that this book was available on NetGalley, I applied for it immediately, only to discover that it was the second book of a series. I read the first book, What Moves the Dead, earlier in the year, and I absolutely loved it. For anyone that doesn't know, it's a retelling of an Edgar Allan Poe classic, The Fall of the House of Usher, which I have never read, but I now assume I would also enjoy. I especially love that book because it had different pronouns for people with various statuses. Those pronouns were thoroughly explained and used throughout the text in ways that felt really important to the story, not just for surface level diversity. This book is a continuation of that series, and I've done a really good job of actually not reading the synopsis at all for this. But I do love this cover, and I would say it's I would say that it is nearly as good as the first book in the series. This one I think has more intrigue perhaps because of the mushroom theme. This one is lacking in the mushroom department. Closing out our red books is the book with the prettiest edges. And that is Five Broken Blades by Mai Corland. I mean, just look at these edges. Black on the bottom, that's fair. But this scene, and it continues to the top. It's just, oh my God. It's just like, it's beautiful. This is a beautiful book. This is a beautiful book. This was the first book that had 4-edge painting like this. And this is definitely the only one I have that wraps around all 3 sides of the book. When I bought this book, I seriously think I went into it thinking, I'm going to buy every book that has beautifully painted edges, no matter if I want to read the book or not. Until I realized that all the special editions have beautifully painted edge work. Can you imagine how this would be going for me if I lived anywhere remotely close to a Waterstones? Not only does this book have beautiful edges, but the end papers are also just so pretty. This is like breathtaking. This book is breathtaking. Thankfully, I do find the premise of this book intriguing. 5 broken blades, 5 assassins attempting to kill a god. Whew, sounds just as good as the side of these pages look. And now we've come to the final color, brown. First up is The Briar Book of the Dead by A.G. Slatter. I bought this book from Barnes & Noble. I physically picked this one up because of the colors on the cover. I typically don't find brown appealing, but it really works for this book. The synopsis of this book alone is intriguing, but what sold me on it is the description of the author's writing style. Told in the award-winning author's trademark gorgeous addictive prose that is an intricate and engrossing tale of a family of witches struggling against the bonds of past sins and persecution. I read that and I was sold. Last, and very much not least, is A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. Becky Chambers is one of those authors whose works I have never read, but I know I'm going to absolutely love. So when I heard about this little number, it got added to my TBR immediately. I checked this one out from the library at one point, and that's when I found out it's a little novella, which makes it extra appealing. I decided to pick this up to pad an order for free shipping, but I ended up choosing it for the readathon that I'm participating in currently. So I should be getting to this one in the next week or two, which I'm really excited about. So that was everything I bought and received during the month of May. Let me know if one of your favorites popped up or if you too found something intriguing in this video, and I will catch you next time. The whitest book I came home with is the next whitest book I have is The Raven Boys. Wow, these white books are going to be really ridiculous to show off. I decided to just throw caution to the wind and what? The Book of ile-rien by Martha Stewart. I think we're good. Done. Send it. Don't send it, but you know.